Well, we're getting to the end of 2020. Time to look back at the year that was. Promise I won't talk about COVID, but I will talk about watches. Today we're going to talk about the 5 most important watches of 2020, or at least in my view. Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. And like I said, my 5 most important watches of 2020. Not the 5 best watches, not the 5 most popular watches, not the 5 most hyped watches, but the 5 watches which I think indicate that there's changes going on, open the door to more changes, or ask us serious questions about what's going to happen in future. I'll start with the Breitling Chronomat. I think this is an important watch for one very simple reason. First off, George Kern is trying to change Breitling. He's trying to make Breitling, take it from being a niche player and something of a butt of horological jokes and turn it into a serious contender at the top end. Not the top end of the market, but a big player within that Swiss and therefore the whole luxury watch industry. The Chronomat is important because that's a key part of his strategy. It represents, the Chronomat is an iconic watch within the Breitling brand, and what it very clearly and specifically turns its back on everything within the Teddy Schneider late 90s to 2015 kind of era, takes us right back to a 1980s, 1990s, the time when Breitling was kind of last really at its peak, at its maximum impact, and drags Breitling back there and kind of resets the clock, killing off the recent history of the Chronomat, and while at it, killing off the recent history of the Galactic, and relaunching Breitling all over again, kind of excising the demon of the last 15 years and saying, here we're going to go back to 1995 and start all over again. The watch so far seems to be getting some pretty good press. Both the three-hander and the chronograph have been broadly popular. Are they popular with everyone? No. Does everyone love the Roulet bracelet? No. But there has been a lot of comments about people saying, first Breitling I've seen for ages that I like, seems to be a bit of a return to form. So I think this is an important watch because it marks the turning point in some people's minds around what Breitling can be. And that could, 10 years from now, we could look back at it and say, this is the moment, that is the watch that forever changed the direction of this company. And that makes this watch pretty important. Moving on to number 2, the watch I'm going to mention now is the Tudor Royale. Particularly important because remember how I said this is not the best watches of the year? I think this is one of the most hideous watches of the year. I despise the Tudor Royale, but I think it's super important. I quite liked the Black Bay 58 Blue. Didn't love it. I thought it was a bit obvious, a bit straightforward, a bit vanilla, but I did like it. It was a handsome piece. It was an insanely popular piece and kind of broke the internet, but in many ways it wasn't a particularly important watch. It was a very obvious watch. Tudor was always going to make another Black Bay 58. That watch was always going to be blue. There was no big surprise, no big reveal, no change of direction. And I said that at the time when I did my hot take on that watch, that this watch, the Black Bay 58 Blue, was so obvious that it wasn't really important. That what was going to be important was what came next, because that would tell us what the future of Tudor was. And what came next was the Tudor Royale. A Rolex Datejust light, a Rolex Day-Date light, sorry, a kind of throwback heritage, slightly older, slightly detuned version of that watch. And I think that's really important because it tells us a lot about what Tudor's going to be. I left out, I should also say, at the same time that that watch came in, we understand that the North Flag was also removed from catalogue. So the North Flag has been discontinued. So not only did they bring in a Rolex light watch, a diet Rolex if you will, but they also killed one of the few remaining watches that marked Tudor out as being independent, as being somehow different. So I think the Tudor Royale is super important because it tells us what the long-term future of Tudor is. Tudor is going to be that kind of lightweight version, the entry-level version into the Rolex family. It probably also is interesting because it tells us about what's happening with the Rolex group. There'd always been a feeling that Tudor could be where Rolex kind of experiments, making it absolutely clear with the Royale, no experimentation is happening within this group. This group has now decided what its look is. It is some variation of the Oyster Perpetual in perpetuity. And I think that makes this watch really important. The next watch on my list is the Casio all-metal G-Shock titanium version. Now, I'm pretty sure this came out in 2020. If it came out a little bit earlier, I apologize. It certainly hit the common consciousness, hit social media in 2020. So I'm going to claim it for this year anyway. The reason why this is important is because it has started to normalize a couple of things. It started to normalize the idea of G-Shocks not being $15, $20, $50. People are falling over themselves to spend $500, $600, $700, $1,000, $1,200 US dollars on a G-Shock. And this is the one, they've done it in the past, but this watch is the one that's made it routine, that's made it normal to do so. And that's really important for two reasons. The first is people are now spending multiple hundreds, thousands of dollars on G-Shocks and not regarding that as a guilty pleasure. That in itself is important. But secondly, it says something about normalizing these people spending thousands of dollars on these quartz pieces. I recently did a live stream with some of the guys on Amin's channel and Amin from Amin Reviews. I'll have a link into his channel down below. Catch it, it's really good. He was just buying a Breitling Endurance Pro, and there was some discussion about, he said himself, he could never see himself buying, a $3,000 US dollar quartz piece from Breitling, and yet here he was. And not only that, he actually found it hard to buy. He actually ended up having to buy it on the secondary market because he was struggling to get the one he wanted new. That is unheard of. That's insane. And I did find myself thinking, when did this happen? And what's changed such that now people are struggling to are racing to get hold of new expensive quartz pieces? I don't know, I'm not going to blame the G-Shock for that, but what I'm going to say is that G-Shock, all metal G-Shock in titanium, for me, marks that turning point. That's the watch which, next year or in a couple of years later, when I look back and we all look back and say, my God, people are spending $2,000-$3,000 on G-Shocks, on these expensive quartz pieces. We're going to look at that watch and say that's the one, that's the point that the direction of the road changed. Next watch I've got on my most important watches is the new Fortis FLIEGER series, the relaunch of the Fortis brand, which is the F43. There's a standard three-hand FLIEGER version, there's a GMT version, and there's a chronograph version. I can't remember the numbers offhand. I'll put them on the screen now. Why is this important? It's important for two reasons. One, Fortis is a long established, well-known, but ultimately relatively small Swiss brand that was on the verge of bankruptcy last year. It was bought out by a private investor who's poured a lot of money into it, and they are relaunching the brand. So far, so good. This happens all the time. But what's interesting is not only are they relaunching the brand or relaunching the brand cheaply, like we see with Yema and a whole bunch of others, they're actually relaunching the brand and raising the price. These new watches are double or even triple the price that previous Fortresses have been. This new Flieger, albeit with the Kinesi movement, the FLIEGER GMT, is $4,500 US. That's insane for a Fortis watch. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm not saying it's not bad value. In fact, I quite like the watch and I would possibly consider it. But the reason I think this is really important is it marks an interesting question. First off, it marks the fact that people are seeing that if you are going to be successful in the long run, you need to go up the ladder in price. You need to move up the rungs. You've got to get away from the bargain basement entry level, because that is in trouble. That's where Fortis used to be. Working in that space is what got them in trouble. They're clearly trying to get up. So that watching Fortis go through that is important, because it marks that that's the change that's happening. But more importantly is what happens next. Do they succeed? Will we as a watch community encourage, support, allow, push that forward? Will we be receptive to this? Or will it be baked into our psyche that no, you need to be down in the entry level Fortis. That is your place. That's your swim lane. I think this is a really interesting test of both us as a community and Fortis as a brand. Have they got the drive? Have they got the energy? Have they got the power to move up? And if they don't, if a brand as storied as Fortis don't, then perhaps no one does. And so maybe in a couple of years' time, looking back at this watch, either this will be the watch that tells us those low-level, mid-level brands can move up, or they can't, and they're doomed to where they are forever because we won't accept them moving up. My last watch, which is most important for this year, is the new Oris Caliber 400 Aquis watch. Why is this important? I think this is important because, again, it asks a question of us, the enthusiast community. We have been saying for years that there is a price cap on what we are prepared to pay for watches with a workhorse movement. We've been demanding that if you go up in price, you have to have in-house movements. Well, Oris have done it. Oris have given us what appears to be a very good movement with a lot of really new and interesting engineering inside it, pushing 120-hour power reserve, pushing 10-year service intervals. So they've made a real strides forward to do something interesting. The trouble is they have just about doubled the price of the watch. You've now taken a case set, a dial, a handset, a bracelet, all of which was perfectly good in a $1,500 US watch, and now said that dial, that case, those hands, that bracelet now is a $4,000 watch because we updated the movement. And the question's going to be, are we going to put our money where our mouth is? Are we as a community actually now going to say, yeah, we think that's where the money should go. Yeah, we're happy buying watches that cost that much with those kinds of cases and those sorts of bracelets and those sorts of dials, and nothing more than an improved movement. Are we really prepared to invest that kind of money in the movement, or not really? I think the Oris 400, the Oris new Caliber 400 is a really interesting watch for, again, like the Fortis, because it asks questions of us. It asks us, are we going to support this sort of thing moving forward? And again, sort of my test of what's important is, would we look back at this watch and ask ourselves questions? I think a couple of years from now, we're going to look back at this, and what our reaction to this watch, our reaction to whether we take it up or not, is going to tell us a lot about ourselves. And it's going to be a kind of a point in the ground where we can say this is where the market changed one way or the other. Anyway, so that's it. They're my 5 most important watches this year: the Breitling Chronomat, Tudor Royale, the Casio All Metal G-Shock Titanium, the Fortis FLIEGER collection, the new Fortis FLIEGER collection, and the Oris Aquis 400. What do you think? Do you think that there are other watches which are generally important that mark changes in the way we're going forward? Or do you think that the Black Bay 58 and the Royal and the Submariner, the new Submariner and the new Oyster Perpetual are actually important watches? Those are very significant watches, but the reason I didn't include them is I don't think they changed anything. They just continue. All they do is they're just a milestone on the path that we're already on. They don't really represent a change or anything really that interesting. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll have a chat about it later. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and yeah, see you later. Bye.